Welcome to Building Conversations, a construction podcast powered by the STO Building Group. On today's episode, Jason Monks, the leader of Tone Dublin's Mission Critical Division, will be talking about the 65-year evolution of data and data centers with Gary Connolly, founder and president of Hostlearn Ireland, a global initiative created to increase awareness of the benefits of hosting digital assets in Ireland.
Jason Monks here from Tone Ireland. I am part of the STO Building Group in my 13th year with Tone and now specialising in data centres, leading up as the Director for Mission Critical here in Ireland, part of the international brand, leading into STO Group headquartered back in New York. This morning we have a very esteemed guest, Mr. Gary Connolly from Hostlearn Ireland, who's going to introduce himself.
Hi Jason, thank you so much. As Jason says, Gary Connolly. I'm founder of Hostlearn Ireland. I'm a failed COBOL programmer, if the truth be known. I came out of college to be a programmer and I realised very quickly that I was really rubbish as an engineer. But one of the things I realised was not all great engineers are great communicators. And not all great engineers, as probably many of you and your listeners know, actually listen to what the end user wants. And so I was that sort of meat in the middle of the sandwich, taking the buffer of what the guy wanted and what the engineers were listening to. And that got me on my journey with data. I've been fascinated with data. In fact, I've been often called a digital optimist. When all others are looking at the negatives associated with data, I say, well, let's be optimistic about it. And obviously that brings us today to where we are discussing the centers, which is obviously the location that the data sits and gets distributed from. So thank you to Tone for the opportunity to talk about data, and hopefully you've got a bit to say about centres, and when you join them together we'll talk about data centres.
Gary, fabulous introduction, thank you very much. A bit like myself, didn't start in the data centre industry, started off doing comms rooms for one of the large US financial institutions, which then developed into data centres providing services for same. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into the data centre market?
And as I said earlier, I came out of college as a programmer, but essentially my love was with data, the power of it, what it could do and what it couldn't do. And you know, at that stage though, it was on floppy disks. We stored on floppy disks, we saved on floppy disks, then hard disks were developed, then personal computers. Then we connected all the personal computers together and we called them LANs or networks. Then we decided that wasn't such a great idea and we developed the cloud. And the cloud really is just a matter of moving those servers that you used to have in your premises to somewhere else because it will possibly be more secure. So that's the evolution. If you track data and how we look at it and how we use it and how it becomes part of our day-to-day lives, really I just see where I am now as the evolution from floppy disks to hard disks to data centers. And where they live and where the servers live is obviously now in a custom built data center.
I like that approach, and I say you've approached it from the data is what got you involved in this really interesting, challenging, but hugely rewarding sector of the industry. And I've come from the center side, which is the design, the construction, the commissioning, someone else operates it typically, but you can't have one without the other. And something you said earlier, without data, the centres that we build are simply glorified logistic warehouses. So it's an intricate operation to manage the two entities there, data and the centre. Ireland is now world known for is the data centre development.
And just before we go on to Ireland, I guess one of the important things to remember is data centres are the manifestation today holding data, which is the fulcrum part of the Industrial Revolution 4.0. And I think that is part of the why. Data is today what steam was in the first Industrial Revolution. So when we consider sort of, it's only a dot-com bubble, it's going to go away, we had this before and all the rest. The fundamentals and what we have to be mindful of is data is steam. It's the actual part of everything to do with every industry. And we often then think, as you know, about the Facebooks and the Googles and the Microsofts and all these types of companies. Every industry and every sector now, from agriculture to life sciences to biosciences to everything, is driven by data. IDC have recently quoted that of the 100% of data that will be on the planet in 2025, there's 7% of it right now. So that gives you a sense that data is creating data to give out more data. And we'll talk about some of the positives and the negatives of that. But it's so important to realize that it is basically the oxygen of the digital universe.
Now, I'm really interested that you touched on the new industrial revolution. It's not new, it's here. It's developing, isn't it?
But it's just evolving. And that's the key thing, is that I read a lot about industry sectors that are about to embrace digitization. Digitization has already happened. And if you're only learning about it now, you're probably way behind. When you consider small things like the largest taxi company in the world doesn't own a single taxi, and it's called Uber. The largest advertising and marketing company on the planet, bar none, is Facebook, and it doesn't actually have an agency. The largest retailer that ever was doesn't have any shop fronts, very few, and that's Amazon. And it goes on and on and on. Airbnb, the largest hotel group in the world, they don't own any hotels. So when you think about, well, what is the common denominator of them? Data. Access to data, access to smart devices, smart handhelds, but fundamentally in the back is data, analytics of data, distribution of data, always on, always the same quality of service. So that's the key thing that we should remember. It's an evolution of our relationship with data. Whereas 20 years ago, you went to interface with data in your office and then you came home. Now people interface with data all the time, from the start to the middle to the end.
Excellent. And as we know, data and centers, they're global.
Yeah.
They're ever expanding.
Yeah.
It seems like it's an unstoppable force, but an unstoppable force created by people, their habits, what they do for fun, what they do for work, how things are managed. And Ireland seems to have grasped a really large piece of that sector, totally disproportionate to the size of Ireland, the size of our population, the size of our GDP. So what makes Ireland such a great market for data centres? Both the data to transfer, the storage, the generation of it, and the centres to accommodate it. Is it the location, the workforce, tax incentives, other factors? What's your view on that, Gary?
I think foreign direct investment is complex, and data centres of the data and the value is just another form of foreign direct investment for Ireland. Ireland now is sort of in the shadow of a very large oak tree that was planted 65 years ago when IBM decided to establish its very first non-North American operation in Dublin. So as you can imagine, that trust by IBM with Ireland started, and that spawned then Digital Equipment Corporation, Nixdorf, Wang, all these companies that are subsequently gone, but they were the Googles, Microsofts and Amazon of their era. They went away and they were replaced then with the likes of Informix, Oracle, BAN, Supercalc, Lotus, software companies. They morphed. Then they were replaced by Gateway 2000, Dell, AST. And then we went to the cloud. So really what we're seeing now is the 60 years of continuous trust in Ireland to understand the question. Because the key thing is, do you understand the question? And if you understand the question as a person, as an industry, or as a country, then you're able to actually give an answer. And Ireland realised that North American companies, if they wanted to globalise, needed a place to put down roots. And therefore, when IBM put down roots in 1956, it made it much easier. And we're seeing it today, that the guys join IBM, they get great discipline, great skills, then they say, okay, I'm ready for my next senior position, and therefore there are available skills for the next guy. Deck comes in, we're looking for senior people. I know it. And so therefore, really what we're seeing, different to some other markets, Ireland's status as the largest single cluster of data centres in Europe is actually just an evolution from when IBM came here 60 years ago. But more to the point, I think, to me, and it's really timely because Intel have announced another 4 or 5 billion capital investment into Ireland. Their first investment was exactly 30 years ago. Now, when you talk about data centers and you talk about clean rooms and you talk about mission critical, the skills and services that companies, indigenous Irish companies, mechanical, electrical, construction, right the way down to sprinkler systems, learned 30 years ago when data centers weren't even an asset class of note, that skills and services were ingrained. Health and safety, how to do things, how to proceduralize things, how to actually document and go again. So all of the companies now that I could write down, and a lot of the employees, even probably with yourself in Structure Tone, worked on Intel, or worked on Pfizer down in Cork, or worked on other mission critical assets. When data centers then arrived around 2000, we were ready for action. We understood the question. We understood that, okay, floppy disks are going, now you're going to go to cloud, which is a different way of delivering software. But the guys didn't have to scratch their heads and say, oh, and I don't understand how you proceduralize things. So now you're starting to see the dividend, both here and with your good selves, where you're now based in Ireland, exporting skills. It's incredible to see that you're using Ireland as this nexus and this sort of centre of the spoke to export those skills to other geographic locations like Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam. So effectively Ireland now is, and always has been, a optimum place to rest data, whether it's on a floppy disk or even a punch card, for your older listeners, floppy disk, hard disk, or the cloud. And everything evolves. And I think most people are realizing trust is probably the key thing. And you only gain trust through time. You don't get it, you earn it.
Really hitting the point there. It's not so much does Ireland attract data center companies or vice versa via the tech. It's an evolution. And what we see as an evolution on the contracting side here specifically is the evolution of what we provide as a service. So companies that we started servicing in the early 2000s, .com. At the time, STO had, I think, 10 to 12 offices in Europe. We were building data centers and people didn't realize they needed a data center, but they wanted one. So we built them.
Yeah.
Whether it was for a financial house or a Yahoo back in the day or an AOL even. But what we really see is the evolution now on the construction side. It's not just what we're doing here in Ireland. A lot of our competitors, our peers, our subcontractors, and you alluded to it earlier, the specialist mechanical and electrical companies, the specialist logistics companies, the sprinklers, the fire alarm guys, who started off doing the Intel work, then into the .com. They are now one of the most sought after trades in mainland Europe. Whether it's the Nordics, the Benelux, including Amsterdam, going down to Frankfurt and over to Paris, it's Irish contractors are leading the way.
That's wonderful, yeah.
We've been doing this, we want to do it, we want to improve our process, we want to bring that service that we've done for you in Ireland all across Europe.
And getting back to your initial question, is it tax, is it this, is it the other? Foreign direct investments is a really difficult thing to put a finger on. But my sense is, after working in it for 30 odd years now, it's relationships. But I mean, that's no surprise to anybody, is that relationships are everything in sport, in business. You see this in Europe and particularly in Britain now. You got all these soccer coaches that go, but a soccer coach comes in, he just doesn't come in on his own, he brings about 20 fellas. It's a team. He brings in a whole team who trust him and all the rest. And that's the same now that we're starting to see, and not just US companies looking at Europe, you're looking at APAC companies that are coming in, and they're looking at the Irish, whether they're going to host data in Ireland or not, they're looking at the Irish contractors to navigate them through the geography of Europe, which to me, at my age, is something that I am so proud of Ireland on, because our generation, you're much younger than I, but our generation, you had one option, and that was a boat or a plane to go when you graduated. Now you can do that. You can learn, but you can come back and work, or you can stay here and actually you have an option. Whether you want to or not, the option is there now. Or with some of the companies you've mentioned, you can get double dip. You can be working for an Irish company located in Europe. I mean, repatriating in those types of funds, we've always been ridiculed for we're this platform for a lot of external companies using Ireland as a base to repatriate. Now we're doing that.
Brilliant. That'll lead us on to something I want to talk about, which is Hosting Ireland. As an outsider to the industry, you look at Irish data centres. Hosting Ireland is one of the most predominant platforms you're going to see out there for putting out the message of what Hosting Ireland can do, what the data industry can do. It's competition, it's cooperation. What Hosting Ireland seem to have done, and it's very evident from all of the social media platforms, from all of the news feeds out there, you've brought together people that you would not normally expect to be sitting around in a circle, exchanging ideas, having a free expression on the challenges that they're having. So why did you start Hosting Ireland, and how has it evolved to what it is now?
It's a great question, because it was a bet. It was an actual bet, because I was on an earn-out at the time and I couldn't work in the industry, so I had to work on it. And so to your point, I called a few friends who happened to be the head of Telecity in Ireland, the head of SunGuard in Ireland, the head of Digital Realty, the head of Viatel, who are data center or transit or telecoms companies. And I effectively said what I truly believed. I think that governments as a institution should support industry, not the other way around. I think as they're in the industry, all governments and everybody else are on an industry. And I thought that maybe if we could get those competitors to not look at each other when they came to sit around a table as competitors, but co-opetition people, i.e. there's an opportunity here at money levels to have a constant common voice. I used actually at the time Tony O'Reilly, who was a very famous Irish rugby player, who had just been appointed in 1971 as the first CEO of Board Bia. Up to that point with the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe, you had Irish butter was being sold at the same price as all other butters, whether it was from Greece, whether it was from Spain, whether it was from, and I'm not disingenuous to any of those, but I believe from those that are in agriculture, Irish butter actually is a bit better. And what he did was, he said, this is nuts. We've got to sell a load of it to the Common Agricultural Policy with restrictions, but let's hold a little bit back, put a gold bar on it, call it Kerrygold, and the tagline should be Kerrygold, Irish butter, the best butter in the world. And as a result of that, him declaring clearly a message, every single dairy creamery in Ireland was suddenly lifted up by just the association with this small gold bar. And what I wanted to do was to say to people, if you're sort of beating each other up at a dairy level in that comparison, you're not really differentiating yourself from others. So I wanted the guys just to come together and say, host in Ireland, that's very clear. Find common ground that you're not beating each other up or your features and benefits, and then clearly communicate that all of you in a clear message. Because if I'm buying an Audi car and 4 dealerships are telling me 4 different things about the same car, I'd probably go and I'll buy a BMW because you lost trust with the brand. So we just basically got the guys to trust that if we had our whole philosophy was going to be, why would you rest data in Ireland? We didn't even talk about the centres, because the centres are the how you host, they're not the why you host. So if you can get somebody to believe that data should be sitting in Ireland, then whether you have a big centre, a small centre, or a blue or green or yellow one by the brands, it's secondary. So you buy into the fact that it's because of policies, pedigree, people, power and pipes, the 5 Ps. And that was basically the 5P message that all these guys went out to say. And suddenly you had people saying, okay, well, I get the Ireland thing. Now, who's there that I could use? So it was all based on the premise that they had to leave their ego and their own balance sheet at the door. And it's still that way. Leave your ego and your balance sheet at the door. Sit down and let's find whatever it might be, are the common things that we don't have to go through all your legal groups or your thing. And through that, what happened was competitors sat down in a room and having scones and coffee regularly and realised that they bleed, all of them. They get colds, all of them. They all have kids. They all have schools. They're human. And suddenly now you've got a group of people who actually don't even see each other as competitors. And Hostlearn Ireland as a platform now has changed so significantly from just bring your data to Ireland to also look at the quality of the Irish contractors that will export and mine your data. So it's built to a community of companies that host data, design, build, operate centres. And now what we're bringing in, and I guess you always know that an asset class is here for the long run, is the professional services companies are coming in, the legal and the fiscal. So it's now a community, not just those original 5. And I think also it's I think you might have alluded to, we like, and it's a we now rather than me, we like to build a relationship with a person, irrespective of your brand you represent. And if we really like the person and they get the ethos and they get the whole thing of the more we promote and help each other and pat each other on the back, the more we can grow. And even if you get 2% of a very large market, it's better 100% of a very small one. And often, and we joked earlier, often we have people that have 15-month probation period to come into Hostlearn Ireland. But notwithstanding that, it's about the people, and then it's about the brands. And it's about a community and an ecosystem, both importing data and exporting skills and services like yourselves. You're a partner here in Ireland because you've got substance here, but I would see Hostlearn Ireland also acting as a platform for you also and the other partners and your peers to meet other countries and people from countries through the platform which is Hostlearn Ireland.
Absolutely, you can see Host as a platform that will help Structure Tone by cooperating in competition with some of the guys that have been there with you for years, guys that we respect, that do a Trojan job. But the strength of the brand of Hostlearn Ireland But you can use that for greater good, particularly in the data center market, whether it's design, operating, even the construction elements of it. One interesting drive that Host is involved in is the bees.
Oh yeah, biodiversity, yeah.
Biodiversity, ecology. What you guys are giving out there as a message, whether it's planting saplings up in the Dublin Mountains in the depths of winter.
Yeah.
But the bees is a really interesting one, because without bees, we probably wouldn't be sitting around this table.
Yeah, but isn't it interesting where you get these ideas and when you allow yourself in your mind to be open, to be taught by 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds. And they're my children. I have a 10-year-old and a 16-year-old. And within 3 months of each other, one of them came back and cited the Barack Obama statement that was, we're the first generation to know all the facts, and the last generation to be able to make any meaningful change to it. And that was staggering, but lots of words. And then my other child came home one day and she just told me, do you know, Dad, that 38% of all the bees in Ireland face extinction by 2050. Now, that was really more tangible, because I hadn't thought about that. And then you think, well, what's that an indication of? Well, that's actually, the bees are just an outward looking of our biodiversity. Biodiversity is really just how planet Earth is breathing and all the rest. So that was the actual driver, my children. Then we looked at the great community we had. That actually the community were saying to us, we need to have more purpose. You know, what should we be doing? What else can we do? And therefore, we realized that we're just enthusiastic amateurs. You need to wrap yourself around people who know what they're doing. So then we went to the National Biodiversity Centre. We built on this idea of, well, what are your challenges? You know, understanding the question, what are your challenges? And they said, messaging. And we're a messaging platform. Getting it more out there that these lads, as to your point, are responsible for 70% of our food sources, natural pollination, etc. So working with them, we have launching this year with yourself and the other partners, we're actually going to launch a data center specific pollinator plan. So it'll be for the data center industry and all sectors of the industry, whether you've got 40 acres of a campus and you want to leave 20 acres of that in wildflower, or you have an office in town and you want a bee hotel, it'll be a 101 run book for the data center industry. And already, because we're starting to publish it, other industries now say, oh, we'd like a piece of that. It can't be so difficult. So you just act as this catalyst to actually be more mindful of it. And in our own little way, I guess, we're trying to help Ireland, and by inclination then, if we can carry the message to other places, that if we all plant one tree, if we all don't cut our grass twice a week, maybe every 3 weeks, that there are consequences of those actions. So yeah, that was DCs for Bees, and it was bloody awful up mountain though when we were planting the trees. It was the most rainy day in Ireland in about 7 years, and but it was memorable. And again, about the people. People all rocked up, including your own colleagues. They were mighty with a shovel, is what they say in Ireland.
There's an interesting part of that, and just jump in. I think it's really the DC designers, the professional services that are there, whether it's the environmental impact guys, the transport guys, with the pressures that are being put on and have been put on data centers because of the Green Convention. It seems that if you're a designer or a builder or an operator of a data center, you've been forcing down this road for a while. So it's been embraced early days and it's evolving. We can see that one of the projects we're doing now, we're putting in natural wetlands as part of the data center.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Our biggest challenge is how do we make it natural, because it has to be man-made to be natural. But it sounds contradictory, but the benefits it'll bring on, you've got another 7 acres of what previously wasn't there, natural wetlands. 100 years ago it was when the natural water course was running through it, or a green wall that's 20 metres tall and 60 metres wide.
Because I think the world is full of advocacy and awareness now, and we need to move individually, collectively, sector into action.
And it's a challenge for us, is the biodiversity, the ecology going green, and you've really hit the nail on the head on one of the key challenges. But alongside that, what would you see are the biggest challenges facing the data center industry, whether it's in development or evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you see as the main challenges, Gary?
When I look at and listen to people like yourselves and you look at the run rate, and we also, as we said in this call earlier, 7% of data now versus the 100% in 2025, just the amount of delivery that has to be executed to the same standard, that unless the industry moves more towards potentially sort of like the hotel industry, where there's a lot of prefab, where there's a lot of that type of stuff. It could be just the pure nature of manpower, the amount of men and women that are available to deliver the capacity that's required. I think that there is a duty of care also on the 4 to 5 companies that are driving 80% to not squeeze out every last cent of profit, for the efficiency of getting it done. There has to be a sense of we are together as a community to deliver this run rate, but there seems to be from some sources saying they want what they got last year, but they want it quicker and they want it cheaper. Something will break. That's a real risk, whether it's the data center industry or whether it's any industry. Something generally breaks. So I think that will happen. And how will that happen? What we're starting to see is a lot of the people moving across from the data center data people, Amazon move into the sub-supply. There's more empathy. A maturing market will always have stages where there's us and them, and then they cross over. Oh, we've got to empathize because these are the problems. And then eventually we'll find the common ground where what's possible and what's real within the budget and the timeline becomes the norm. But there's no magic formula, is there?
No.
Like, what are you seeing? Are you seeing more modularization and more sort of off-site type?
Well, we're seeing a lot of modularization, particularly on power pods. But you've hit it there, like power, it's a problem. You overcome it. It's not as big a problem as it actually is. Connectivity, it was a problem when there was none, but there is connectivity and there's more coming of it.
Yeah.
Space, it's a problem. You move further away from the T50 out into the country a little bit, and the connectivity follows you out there. They're all challenges you can fix, and there's opportunities in it. And the customer now wants them built quicker. So modular, put your switchgear in your UPSs in a building and hook it up onto site and cable it up in 2 or 3 days. But all of that comes back to what I find is the biggest challenge for us out there is people. Definitely the biggest challenge.
That is a global challenge.
Yeah.
It's a global challenge. But if you can't get the people, it often drives innovation. It often drives innovation because even now when you go to some of the events, you see some amazing startup scale up on AI, algorithm guys who really are bringing building management systems to a whole new level, and that brings innovation because the ultimate is to solve a problem. But the speed though, Jason, is just unprecedented. 100 billion capital spend last year in data centers, 120 billion projected this year. I mean, I don't think even if you look back to oil and gas, and that's the opportunity. That's the opportunity for some of your subdivisions. That's the opportunity for companies like yourself to acquire AI companies. So rather than actually, because if you want to be disrupted, just do nothing. If you want to disrupt yourself, then you're likely to be there in 2-3 years' time. And that's the opportunity. That's what we're seeing.
And with your engagement with the owners, the early days, the guys that want to invest and build, whether it's in Ireland or export Irish services to Europe, what sort of trends are you seeing from particularly the US and Asia? What do you see as the future of this?
I guess like we started earlier, and to me the data is the why and the center is the how. I might have said that earlier. So if you look at the trends in data, to me it's like a Russian doll. You think of a Russian doll, you have huge Russian dolls, and then they feed into each other and into each other and into each other. And we're finally entering, in this decade we'll see it, where we have fit for purpose compute. What does that mean? We're going to now have such a variety of options that the size and scale of the center and the compute power and the storage will fit the application. So when we see the trends, and you don't have to believe me, but when a child from Kurdistan wins 3.2 million in Fortnite for the World Championship versus Tiger Woods who wins 2.9 for the Open, there's a change taking place. So gaming, holograms, last mile, at the edge, that stuff is quite intensive. So you're going to see, like you do at the moment for your telecoms, BNs and ANs in every single jurisdiction. And that'll be fit for purpose. That'll be optimum to whatever apps at that time. You'll have a 5G antenna into it because it all has to work. There's no point in having a box at the end if you've nothing antenna that can't capture the data. So 5G, just bigger bandwidth, will draw edge. But it'll be feeding into a municipality center, which will feed into a country center, which will feed into a continent center, which will subsequently feed then into bigger hyperscales. So it really is, in your mind, I often think, is if you think of the Russian doll, one's feeding into the other, feeding into the other, feeding into the other. So I think fit for purpose is coming along the lines. There'll only be more data. People are becoming more optimum with their data. I think big data is a term you hear everywhere. I think big companies are going to go to little data. Let's hold only the amount of data we optimally need to. And that's been driven by GDPR, data privacy, data protection, and then video. Video is just the biggie. All forms of video, AR, VR. But I think everything evolves in the hype cycle. And we're going to see more centres, small ones, medium, large ones, gigantic ones. And we're going to see them in the locations that are fit for their purpose. And what's the purpose? Whatever application they're trying to service. But the one thing is for sure is that data is the oxygen of the Industrial Revolution, 4.0. The more data, the more centres. More centres by size and scale. Ireland's relationship with that, I think Ireland has a very solid relationship with data going forward. We're a tier 1 location. Therefore, when you consider that there are only maybe 10 other tier 1 locations in the world, and we're exporting all these skills, one will balance the other. But sitting here with 3 Irish guys who are exporting their skills, New York, Dublin and everywhere else, I think that's what makes me proud to be in an industry or part of an industry that is exporting skills and services rather than just exporting people.
Gary Connolly, it's been memorable. We really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome.
We could go on for probably another 2 hours, but we might have to sign
Can't
off.
afford me.
Where's the spirit?
Thanks for listening to Building Conversations.